Welcome back to just another solar podcast with Luke Beattie, that's me, and Karl Jensen.
Morning, Luke.
Morning. How's the new job going, Karl?
Good, mate. Good. And this is our first ever morning show.
It is. Normally the premise is that we do this like we're at the pub as a solar professional. Quite often we have a beer in our hand, but it's just past 8 a.m. Perth time on Saturday morning. So I've gone with a coffee.
And a pretty special guest today, Luke.
It is. And if we're at the pub, we might introduce him as Jono or Grimesy or something similar. Very high profile figure, but I think he also deserves a proper introduction as well. So today we've got John Grimes, who's the CEO of the Smart Energy Council. He's been a notable advocate for the industry, a lobbyist with government, and it's really since the Australian Solar Council started, I think it was 2008, has a very high platform. So we're honoured to have John Grimes on the show today. G'day, John.
G'day, Luke. G'day, Karl. Fantastic to be here.
It's a pity our viewers can't see the smile on my face. You're another in a long line of amazing guests that we've had, and we're really feeling privileged that you've made the time this morning to come on the show.
No, fantastic. I've certainly heard this show and really enjoy it.
You've had a huge week this week. You've been to Canberra. You've met with Chris Bowen. So what's the story there?
Yeah, no, so it has been a huge week. Just worth saying, Luke, you were talking back to 2008. Actually, the Smart Energy Council traces its history back to 1954 in Australia. Can you believe that? Over 65 years. It was scientists after World War II in CSIRO inventing solar hot water technology. That's really the genesis of our organisation. So and we've got over 1,000 corporate members across the country. So fantastic. So yeah, I had an opportunity with the change of government federally, everything's changed. Really, we were very, very active in the states and territories, and we've got great relationships right across the country. But at a federal level, trying to get in to see Angus Taylor was a no-go zone for us, right? Because, well, mate, we'd called them out, right? So it just wasn't possible. With a change of government, it feels like we've gone from opposition to government. So all of a sudden, we've got really fantastic access into the Prime Minister's office, the Energy Minister, the Junior Energy Minister, and all of the Environment Minister, a whole bunch of others. So it's a really great breath of fresh air.
What a change, though.
It is fantastic to have the federal minister, calling me literally every second day at present. And that's because the big thing on their plate is this energy emergency, right? So
that's really blown up in the last 2 weeks. Every time we turn on the news, there's an energy crisis and power bills going up by enormous numbers. And
totally.
Thursday morning on the Today Show, they said Discover Energy had gone up 285%, which is obviously a massive number, the biggest in history, so on and so forth.
It's had huge implications. Obviously, power is a big issue for the whole economy. So they've kind of been in crisis mode around that. The other thing that they're looking up is under the previous government, they had this policy called a capacity mechanism. And basically the idea under the previous government was to keep paying coal and gas producers to still be there even after it didn't make economic sense for them to be there anymore. So it's probably not a great proposition for our industry because it kind of keeps the incumbents kind of locked in. Now, the Energy Security Board's done a heap of work on this and they've given a report to government. And so that's one of the first issues that's come up for him. And so really what he's doing is really trying to get a view from our industry. What is the transition that needs to happen? How much renewable needs to be built? How much energy storage needs to go into the system? And what are the other mechanisms we can do to have a coordinated transition, not a disruptive or kind of expensive transition? And how do you do that and make sure you get the clean energy into the system that we need in the future? So that's really been at the heart of what we've been talking about.
The billion-dollar question, John, is why did this happen?
Why did the energy crisis happen that we've currently got? Okay. Yeah, well, the primary reason is the design of the energy market. So a lot of the old coal-fired power stations, they're finding it very hard to compete because they're competing against cheap wind, cheap solar. And so actually they're letting the assets run down. They're actually turning units off and they're not bidding in at certain times into the market. So you've got that as kind of a structural problem. And then on top of that, we've had a really cold winter. And so demand has been much higher than normal. And on top of that, we've got a war in Ukraine. And because Russia is no longer, everyone's not buying the Russian coal and oil and gas anymore, or trying not to, means world prices have spiked. So the gas companies, gas mining companies, the coal mining companies that take Australian gas and coal and sell it to the world have just made a massive windfall profit. So gas used to be about $6, and then it went to about $9. It's been sitting at $9 for a number of years. It's currently at $40. So that huge increase in gas prices, coal similar. And so what those companies are doing is they'd rather sell that to the international market where they can get a really high price rather than selling it to the domestic market. So you put all of that together, it was the perfect storm. They're the main drivers.
So the numbers must be huge for the batteries that'll be required, or just storage more generally, to reach 2030 and 2050 targets.
AEMO put out an update to what they call the Integrated System Plan, which is kind of their plan of how we're going to transition between now, 2030 and 2050. What they're showing is really big numbers. So total renewable energy in the system is going to go 3x between now and 2030. That's only 8 years, right? 3x in the next 8 years. So think of every wind turbine, every big solar thing, every rooftop solar, times it by 3. That's the trajectory. And in terms of energy storage, it's even more ambitious because we're starting from a pretty low base in terms of batteries, particularly big batteries and pumped hydro storage. So there's a big build program coming, which is fantastic news for our industry, but is also a big challenge. It's not going to be a trivial thing to do.
Interesting, John. Obviously, I just started the new job. There's talk of how much growth the business has had over the last 12 months, 2 years, so on and so forth. And those numbers are nothing like 200% or 300%. And you're talking a 300% increase in what our industry does in order to be able to hit those targets by 2030. And some of the things that came to mind immediately for me was, if I look at the 2050 target, that's 28 years away. It's quite feasible, but people out there are going to replace their systems twice in that time on top of those numbers.
And the other one, Karl, is people are going to start to get their gas bills, right? People don't know about this impact on the price yet. It's going to take another quarter or even 6 months for that to wash through to people's bills. When you open up your bill, you'll have a heart attack. So the first thing you're going to do is going to be calling your local solar installer to say, get me onto a heat pump for my hot water, get me onto a reverse cycle air conditioner for air conditioning, get me onto an induction cooktop, and cut the gas.
Electrify everything.
Electrify
that was
everything.
At your conference in Sydney recently, Saul Griffiths said.
Totally. And power it all with renewable energy, particularly with solar. And then on top of that, we've got the influx of electric vehicles into the system, right? And people are going to want to kind of power those as well. So these are the golden days, right? The next 8 years is the transformation of everything in the Australian economy. And look, I'm a bit worried about it because we've already got a massive skills shortage. We've already got pressures in the supply chains, but if we work together, hopefully we're all up for the challenge to really to boost it on.
Yeah. So can you do something about the exchange rate for us, John?
Yeah. No, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. I'll sell my Bitcoin or something. I don't know.
Well, it's a straight up impact of 10%. As in, that's what the dollar's dropped in the last 8 weeks, Luke, something like that. And we've still got lots of stock in the market that's onshore. And of course, now we're seeing demand pick up. Back of the envelope forecast that October, the large amount of stock in the market would have washed through. All of a sudden, I'm thinking August might be a possibility and we might start seeing prices rising next month.
Yeah, I mean, those costs have to be passed on. Businesses can't do that. And we've got to make sure that our industry is sustainable. We can't have distributors going out of business. We can't have installers going out of business. You've also got to think about that in terms of contracting with customers, because if you're putting a quote in, prices are changing quite rapidly. And, if they don't come back to you for a couple of months, that can have a material impact on your business. So all very important considerations.
We now have a friendly government with an open door to the SEC. Are there any policies that you champion, or is the government flagged anything that they're going to do at their end to support this rollout of solar and batteries?
Well, the reason we're doing this on a Saturday morning, and sorry about that bloody disaster, I know, it is because, if you like, the Smart Energy Council has had a whole lot of initiatives that we've taken to the federal government over the last 9 years. Everything from skills and development training to modifying, how the whole STC and the RET target sort of works, through to capacity building and skills development in the Pacific, our Pacific Island nations, how we could get our people to kind of really teach the world how to install solar in the most efficient way, because we're the best in the world, right, at doing this stuff. And so we've had all these initiatives we've taken to government. Now, what's happened is that the government officials, they love them, right? They're like, this is a no-brainer. This is fantastic. They pushed up the line. It'd get to the political level and they'd see Smart Energy Council and it would be dead, right? It'd be killed because we dared to call them out on what they were doing. Well, now actually we've got the reverse situation. So now we've got agencies and departments saying, we want to really push ahead in this area. Oh, actually, they're dusting off all these proposals. Like, okay, we want to do that one and that one and that one. So all of a sudden, we're in the washing machine. And so the big challenge for us is going to actually be getting the resources to actually execute and capitalize on this moment in time, because there are very few industries that are as well placed in terms of influence as we are right now. We'd have rocks in our heads not to really capitalize on this moment. And so, I'm trying to employ staff to give Wayne Smith a right hand and a left hand. We're a small team, so that's what we've got to do. So that's our challenge.
So let's talk about where the SEC is now, what the current responsibilities are, but also what some of the future ones may be.
Really interesting time. As I say, there's the sort of the world's collectively our oyster. For me, some of the things that we're doing, we're setting up these working groups. So we've got a DER working group, so Distributed Energy Resource Working Group. So we've got about 30 of our corporate members in that working group, being led by Dr. Gabrielle Kuiper, who was the energy specialist from the Energy Security Board. She also worked as Prime Minister Gillard's energy advisor in the Prime Minister's office. So, really great talent. We're setting up a large-scale working group. But one of the things, Luke, I really want to do is I just want to engage with the installer base more. I want to make sure that we're representing that base. And it's really important that I hear of the problems that people are encountering so that we can take them on and put them into our work program. So I think there's a real opportunity for collaboration. And in a sense, I'm here. Like, my only motivation is to make this a great industry, to give consumers a good long-term outcome, and to make sure we've got professional and sustainable businesses that are profitable and growing in our sector. That's my only, I've got no other agenda. And so I'm here as, if you like, a servant to the industry. And so I'm really keen to get that communication and make sure that we intervene wherever we can to make a difference for the industry.
Funny you should say that, John. I hear that complaint from installers on a fairly regular basis. We can't compete with these cowboys, this sort of thing. And they're talking about perhaps some of the larger installers in the market. I don't think I've ever come across anybody that goes to work to do a shit job. And similarly, if we're talking 3 gigawatts being installed a year, I don't think that people really understand that's 45,000 panels a day being installed across Australia. And if we're talking a handful of so-called dodgy operators, they might amount to being 100 out of the 45,000 panels that are being installed every day. So I'm trying to encourage the industry as a whole to stop using that as a marketing ploy, we're better than the cowboys, because I just don't see that there's cowboys out there. And the sort of damage that does to our industry in terms of public perception is actually quite significant. So installers say to me, I can't get a deposit because my customer doesn't trust that I'm going to do a good job, and they won't pay me until I've finished the job. And of course, now that we're installing batteries with solar systems, it's not uncommon to have a $30,000 bill for a battery and a solar system. So installers are wearing quite a significant risk that the customer turns around and says, actually, didn't think he did a good job today. I'm not sure how to get that message out there. And the Smart Energy Council seems like some tool that could be perhaps employed to helping the industry get over that particular hurdle. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I agree. I think we should be really boosting our industry. I remember back, this many years ago, BP Solar had their campaign, the best solar installer in the universe. Do you remember that? Like years and years ago.
They only had one, yeah?
Yeah, they only had one. That's right. Yeah, exactly. But this kind of concept that kind of, the solar installer is your local hero, right? They're the people that are going to come, they're going to look after you, they're going to actually slash your power bills, and they're going to be there to support you in the long term, and that's the image we need to create around our industry and cultivate, and that's important. The other thing is we need to be taken seriously by the whole energy sector and by governments. Solar, batteries, massive part of the energy market today. Over 30% of Australian rooftops have, solar in lots of states, but they still treat us as a bit of an afterthought and they still mess us about. So, South Australia will come out with a ruling saying we're going to have this big red button to push and actually disconnect solar at times in the grid, right? And they say, oh, by the way, that's happening next Tuesday, right? That's kind of the consultation process, right? And so I think they've got to take it seriously. And the rules around DER are a mess, a hot mess, right? The standards process that actually comes up with these rulings that has no link to the real world, that actually means business are potentially going bust. Manufacturers can't comply. We're actually becoming a laughing stock globally because we're the only jurisdiction in the world insisting on all these things, including rooftop solar isolators, for goodness sake. Like probably the dumbest thing you could do, only place in the world that did it. Even New Zealand, who's our joint standards partner, said, no way, we're not doing that, right? And so this has got to stop. We've got to have a technical advisory approach. We've got to have experts in DER, and the rule makers need to start taking our advice and taking it.
And John, we need improvement in that area. So the last 12 months have seen maybe 3 or 4 crises which threatened to bring the industry to a standstill. So issues with DC isolator certification, inbuilt DC isolator certification, all these other issues where, to the credit of the Smart Energy Council and to yourself, you've jumped in when there's a crisis, you've engaged from grassroots to the regulators to all the stakeholders and at least pushed for a resolution. But wouldn't it be a better industry if we didn't have those crises in the first place?
Oh, absolutely. The last thing I want, we just roll our sleeves up and we just do whatever it takes to get on with it, right? And the good thing is that, with our influence, we can pick up the phone to state energy ministers. We can say, look, electrical safety regulators are just taking the wrong approach on this. They're taking a kind of a bureaucratic approach. The truth is this goes ahead, this industry closes down. 80% of the inverters are off the market, right? And a workforce of 25,000 people around Australia stops. Absolutely unacceptable, And so you've got to play all of those bits together. You've got to delve into and look, I don't pretend to be a technical expert, but I rely on really great people in our industry to pick up the phone. Rod Dewar from Fronius stands out, but there's a whole bunch of them, right, that I rely on to really kind of just decode it for me, and so that I can fire the bullet and get the best result. But you're right, Luke. Let's stop this, right? I don't want to be in a position where next Tuesday our industry could come to a halt, right? That's just got to stop. And so it's got to be a coordinated process. We've got to engage early, and hopefully that's what we get a chance to do in this next phase.
It's interesting, John. There's been lots of discussion on the forums about we should have government-owned utilities instead of privately owned utilities, and this never would have happened if we had government-owned utilities. And I sort of waved the flag, obviously spent 10 years in WA and said, hey, WA's got a government-owned utility, and not only is their peak rate energy cost more than 50% higher than it is on the East Coast already, but silly rules have been implemented in recent times where any time a customer has more than a 5 kilowatt inverter on a 3-phase site, they've got to change out the main switch for a 32 amp breaker, which if you own an electric car, all of a sudden your 15 kilowatt inverter and 20 kilowatts on the roof and your, say, 60 square house in Applecross looks like you need a 20 kVA genset in the driveway. The situation currently where we've got a privatised grid on the East Coast is actually a good thing, and there was never really a golden bullet to solve these problems.
I reckon, Karl, another issue is grid connections, right, with DNSPs. So at the moment, the DNSP is judge, jury, and executioner. They can take as long as they like. They can charge the fees. It's a completely opaque system. They can just reject you, and so it's a disaster. So you go, you find a client, you get them ready, you do a quote, you go and do, and all that work's gone because some engineer in the DNSP has just, had a bad day on a Friday, and all of a sudden it's done. So the system's broken. It's got to be fixed. And
there's a bit of a joke in WA where people need to contact Western Power, the DNSP around Perth and the Swiss grid. The perception is that they're only as useful as the person on the end of the phone.
Totally. And if you don't have a relationship, with someone that you've kind of cultivated over time, then you're in the call center and you're on hold for an hour and a half. Like, it's just a disaster.
Coming back to the DNSPs and retailers and so forth, one of the bits of feedback that we got coming into this podcast, knowing that you'd be on was in regards to, they were using the example of AGL, but it's not only AGL, around retailers who have solar arms and multiple solar businesses in some cases. And an example was given to me that one of these solar retailers would go to a customer, get them very interested. The customer would request the metering data from their retailer, and then the retailer would contact that customer knowing that they're a solar prospect with their own alternative solar offer. Is there an ethical issue there?
I think it's unconscionable, but I really need the concrete examples. So, I mean, I heard this some time ago, a couple of years ago, actually, before the COVID thing happened. I actually raised it with the media. I was doing an interview with 730 Report. I said, look, I've heard stories of this. And when the journalist went to actually talk to people about actual examples, no one could give her any. I look like a bit of a goose, to be frank. So if people have those real world examples, send them through, because we won't stand for it. And I'm really happy to go into bat and back people up with that sort of thing. But I need real world examples, not just a story of a story. You know what I mean? So really keen to hear directly from people who are affected.
So John, in increasing renewable energy by 300% on the grid, we're going to need to get a lot more people into our industry. Have you got any ideas on how we can skill those new people?
Well, the new government has an apprenticeship program, so they're going to fund 10,000 new apprenticeships in solar and batteries, and so that's really good news. We want to get that money flowing as quickly as possible, because if we can get more young people into our industry, that's a good thing, but it takes time for it to wash through. But that's a really good start. We're going to have to scale up. It means a lot more people, a lot more professionalism, and a really mainstream approach for what we do.
And also on the sales side, there's been some conversation around whether salespeople should be licensed based on some of the criticisms that salespeople are disconnected from what the actual solutions need to be, potentially dishonest, lacking decent ethics. And someone suggested an accreditation process for salespeople.
There's a tension in two directions. One is the solar industry is probably the most over-regulated industry in the country, right? So we just get hit from every side. Having said that, if you think about it, there's good controls over components. There's good controls over installers and designers. But the retailers really was kind of the unregulated part. We raised this with the Clean Energy Regulator and with the federal government. To their credit, under the last federal government, they made some big changes. So the new requirements from the CER is that in order to get the STCs, the retailer actually has to make a declaration. And so this actually, for the first time, imposes a whole bunch of controls on retailers that haven't been there before. So they have to say, yes, all the detailed documents have been provided. The system's going to produce at the level that we've advised the customer where it's going to be. So there's all sorts of hooks in there. Now, the Clean Energy Regulator's intention is to actually enforce that. And so I wouldn't be surprised if shortly you start to see some heads on spikes. They're going to chop off some heads and they're going to put them at the entry, and they're going to say, beware retailers who come this way and want to play fast and loose with the truth and want to do the wrong thing by their customers. That's basically what it's going to do.
So and the first step was to bring in that requirement.
Was to bring in that. So
and then the enforcement is the next step, yeah?
That's right. 1st of April, that's already in. So the retailers have to make those declarations. Now, the CER have the powers of the police, right? They actually have former AFP people and investigators working for them, and they can bring both civil and criminal charges. And the law is really, if you make a false declaration to the Commonwealth or you generate funds through a Commonwealth program illegally, mate, better watch out. The other thing they're going to do is they're going to start to actually monitor phoenixing. So if you're a director of a company, you close down your solar company, you restart another company, that's going to flag it straight away for them. So they're actually going to be targeting individuals in this. I think this is a really big step forward for our industry. It's the last missing piece. So I think that actually what's been put in place in some ways is even better than an accreditation scheme, because they're going to put the police on people who don't do the right thing. So it's a big step forward in my view.
And another change is that the CEC won't have the sole authority anymore. And I heard a whisper that the products accreditation is up for discussion around who's going to manage that. And I believe also the accredited installers and other responsibilities. What more can you tell us about that?
The Clean Energy Council is exactly the same as the Smart Energy Council. It's a private organisation. It's a peak industry body. It's a not-for-profit. It is not a government organisation. It has no government powers per se, except that many years ago, they were written into federal legislation as being the accreditation provider for solar installers. Now, in the legislation, there were 3 organisations that were named. One of them went bust, and the other 2 merged to become the Clean Energy Council. So there was never an intention, because what the government's done is effectively given a monopoly accreditation power to a private sector provider, right? And as a monopoly provider, there is no recourse, right? They have the authority of government, basically, in deciding who gets accredited or who doesn't get accredited. Now, we've always argued that's a perverse outcome. That's very bad. In a monopoly, monopolists relax, right? They've got no competition. The phone rings and no one answers it. Who cares? Who cares, right? They say, okay, well, the fees used to be X dollars. Now we're going to put another 30% on that. Guess what? No one can do anything about it, because if you don't have if they don't clip the ticket, right, then you don't get to work. So monopolies are poor public policy, right? Bad outcome for the industry. And the people who suffer are the people who are the customers of the program. And the customers are the installers and the designers, right? And the customers are also the manufacturers who have to get their products listed, right, through this process where it's completely opaque, no visibility about the fees. How much money do they rake in? What do they do with that money? Right? Is it reinvested into giving good outcomes for the clients, right? So we argue to the government, the regulator should be the clean energy regulator. The government should be the authority, not a private sector entity, right? So the clean energy regulator should be the thing. Now, they've said, okay, but we're going to outsource the function of somebody doing it. So in a sense, somebody would say, yes, this person should be accredited, and then the clean energy regulator will review it and say, yes, they put their stamp on it, right? Now, the good news is they've agreed with that argument. They've said, actually, it needs to be contestable, it needs to be transparent, it needs to give good outcomes for the customers. So what they've put in place is that they're going to go through a tender process in the coming months, so sometime within about the next 6 months, to actually go to market, and they're going to say there could be 1 or more accreditation providers. Now, depending on who puts in for it, there'll be 1 or maybe a couple of them that will do this. Now, what that would do, it's contestable. Then there's the fees are reviewed, and it's all about who can provide the best service to the customers, right? As opposed to, so that's a good thing. Now, let me just say here, the Smart Energy Council would really like to take on that responsibility, but we'd like to do it in partnership with the installers. We want the installers and designers to help us design the best system possible that delivers really great service to the industry, but also make sure it's got good assurance so that the wrong people aren't getting through the program. And so that, in a sense, the experts of it should be helping design the system that then is going to be applied to them. That's a call for partnership that I have with the industry. The other component is actually listing the components, the inverters and the panels and so forth. So what the CER has said is that actually, no, it shouldn't just be a monopoly thing the Clean Energy Council does. We're going to think about whether we're going to take that to market or not. And so they're going to be asking the industry, should we just stay with the current system, or should we have a contestable process to potentially have a different provider? In my view, this is a great opportunity for everybody to say what they think. What's your experience been in getting inverters listed and other components listed, right? And so if you think that that's been great, well, that's fantastic. If you think there's room for improvement in terms of timeframes and fees and everything else, then now's your chance to have your say to the Clean Energy Regulator directly, and then they'll act on that in terms of where they go from here. So at the end of this process, yes, the CEC may be a service provider, and to be frank, they've been doing this for so many years that they are the incumbent. So it's going to be hard to kind of challenge them, right? But it's not guaranteed. And so you could have a situation where they're not. But in my view, I very much hope there's choice for installers, because choice means competition, which means better outcomes for installers.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Obviously, Glenn Morris. When we had him on the show, everybody knows him in the industry. He runs an off-grid battery course that isn't endorsed. We sort of said, hang on a sec, so you don't actually get an accreditation if you do your course. And Glenn said, well, he wrote the standards 30 years ago, and he said they're just so far out of date. They're so irrelevant. And he tried so hard to have those standards changed to bring them up to speed with current technology and current thinking around how to do this. It just killed him, bashing his head against a brick wall. And hence, he tells people to go out, do the accreditation course, then do his course to learn how to bring it into the 21st century, and then you're good to go. The drawback to that is, well, what we're installing now may not actually meet those other standards that we've trained people.
So let me give you another example. Go onto the CEC listing for where you get your CPD points. They are the authority that lists CPD points, right? There are two buckets. One, CPD points provided by the Clean Energy Council. You can click in there straight away, find all the things, sign up to whatever you like. CEC points from other organisations, right? Kind of like the second tier cousin. You've got to find the fine print, go through, maybe find some courses. We've got an inherent conflict of interest that in terms of setting points, in terms of accrediting training processes, in terms of all of this, because we're actually competitors, right? We are competitors to the Clean Energy Council. And so it's unacceptable and it's got to end. Now's our opportunity to change things.
So how can installers and companies make submissions about the changes they'd like to see?
So the CEO will put out a call, and we'll also put out a call and just and say, now's your chance. And look, put it in. Look, if you've had a fantastic experience, that's great. But if you think there's room for improvement, if you'd like to see competition, if you'd like to see transparency, if you'd like to see them, whoever the service provider is justifying their fees, then I would argue strongly that it's got to be a contestable process.
Yeah, it's a bit like the, can you provide some comment and feedback on AS 5033? And plenty of us sort of figured, well, what chance have I got of making any changes to this document? So I won't even bother reading it. And then all of a sudden, people that we thought would have had all of those things lined up, ducks in a row, certainly the 1.25 ISC thing didn't jump out for me. So here we are.
Karl, actually, we're actually talking to the federal government right now about a program to say we should adopt the IEC standard, the international standard around this stuff, as the de facto standard in Australia. And if we're going to make any amendments to it, there has to be a really good argument for it. It's got to actually win a debate in a technical expert panel. And then those changes should only be for those tiny bits that relate to the changes they want to see in this market. But this nonsense where we think we have to reinvent everything in this country in terms of standards. And then you've got these massive global supply chains that sell product, safely into Germany, into North America, into Japan and other places. And all of a sudden, it's not good enough for Australia. It's a nonsense, mate. It's got to stop.
It's also the time to get amendments done. The AS 5033 was posted. There was a couple of issues that they found that could have been done much better. But the process for that to get changed again is years, not months, not weeks.
Here's something you might know. Standards Australia is a for-profit organisation. SAR Global. So they will only update a standard if the standard's profitable. They sell the standard, right? So it's a huge cost, right? So unlike in New Zealand where they give the standard free of charge to anyone in the industry, which is the way it should be, because it's basically, here's the rule book that you've got to follow. It's all about making money, mate. It's all about making money. And so it doesn't serve our industry. And with technology changing so rapidly, with us being such an important part of the energy market going forward, it's just not good enough anymore.
We mentioned the 1.25 ISC. Half of that problem actually goes away with paralleling strings. If we can have strings that are bigger than 600 volts, which is obviously part of the intent in 5033, but 4777 conflict screwed that idea.
It's a bit like arbitrary rules made about oversizing solar systems. I mean, it's just, where does this stuff come from? It's just not necessary.
Probably had something to do with the 200% oversized systems that I was endorsing, encouraging more than 10 years ago. And I still think that 200% is the right number for an east-west system. And it certainly provides, let's call it a capacity factor like wind. So if we've got a 1 megawatt wind turbine capacity factor of 30%, we can bank on a 300 kilowatt baseline. So similarly, if I have a solar system that's 10 kilowatts on the roof and a 5 kilowatt inverter, I provide a nice 5 kilowatts to the grid most of the time, as opposed to it jumping up and down like a yo-yo in poor conditions. So I thought that would be a good outcome for the grid. And here we are. We've landed somewhere that outcome really isn't that much better than not putting anything in.
I would argue that the best number is whatever the manufacturer has recommended.
Imagine that,
Yeah, better than some arbitrary number.
Well, not necessarily. So the manufacturer has a vested interest in there as well, in that it's the most expensive individual component in the solar system.
So there's a design element too, right, Karl? You know, it just depends on the application. Yeah.
Well, the design element is, am I going to push 10 megawatts a year through a 5 kilowatt inverter, or am I going to push 15 megawatts a year through it? And I'd argue that the utilization of that asset for the customer is best as high as possible.
Now, John, we've discussed lots of very interesting things, but we typically come to our guests, and especially people like yourself who have very busy lives, and we talk about balance in their life and work-life balance, how you manage it well, whether you manage it well. What's your take on it?
Mate, you wouldn't believe it, but I'm actually 23 years old. I just like what the hell, you know, if my work-life balance is out of control because I'm sort of on, 24/7, particularly doing, when you get media requests at no notice and you get senior people that you need to respond to and do it quickly. I need to get better at it. My one hobby, Luke, is photography, particularly travel photography, just street photography, nothing posed. I like to see the world as it actually is. And so if I can just carve out a little bit of time to just go out and just and take some photographs, I'm very happy indeed. Happy to say I'm taking a week's leave at the end of the week and heading to my childhood home, which was Christmas Island, where I grew up as a kid. And so just love to get back in the jungle and amongst the crabs. And yeah, fantastic. So
loosely, I can call you a WA boy.
Look, there you go. Put me down for it. Yeah. And I actually lived in Perth for a couple of years as a kid. I lived in a suburb called Innaloo, which of course in about year 4 was pretty funny. So
Still is.
That's good. So now you've got open borders. Is there anywhere that you'd really like to go and practice photography or relax? Where's your wish list location?
Yeah, sure. So actually, I do like getting overseas as well. And I like the back alleys and kind of the more interesting places. I'm not interested in the tourist attractions, So, if I could get into, some of these countries around the region and around the world, then that's probably where I'm at the happiest.
Looks like the door for Chernobyl's closed for the next couple of years, John.
Yeah, no, I think there's a few, there's a bit of dust being kicked up, right? So not good. So
we got in just before, Karl.
That's it, mate. Thank ourselves lucky every day that bucket list item got ticked off. But have to find new bucket list items. Looks like there's a fair amount of interest for Intersolar 2023. So I guess we'll see you there, John.
Well, that's right. And look, just another one, I think I'm heading to India in a few weeks' time. And I'm really doing that to see, is it feasible to think about India as a source of components? What opportunities are there for linkages? Because I think that that relationship is becoming more important. And so it'll be interesting. Hopefully I'll get a weekend to kind of be in the back alleys of old Delhi or somewhere and get some good photographs in the process.
Yeah, India is a very interesting market. We sort of perceive it as being way behind the rest of the world, but I don't think that's the case. And it'd be great to hear what you find there.
It's been huge. I mean, the Modi government committed to electrifying the whole country. And a big part of that was solar, and a lot of that solar was produced domestically. But as a result of that, they also had a very insular market where they didn't want to export it. They wanted to be using it domestically. So if you could open those doors and open up that opportunity, it'd be huge.
Yeah, they've got big plans and putting lots of money behind it, So let's see. We'll go and have a look and see which way's up.
Okay, John. Well, that's all we have time for today. I know you're a busy man, so cutting out the time for us is really appreciated. Thank you.
No, fantastic, Luke and Karl, really appreciate it. Can I just end with one plug? What are there, about 7,500 installers in Australia? About 350 of those are members of the Smart Energy Council. I'd really encourage people to think about it this way. You wouldn't hop on someone's roof if you didn't have insurance, right? You just wouldn't get up the ladder, right? And so think about being a member of the Smart Energy Council is like insurance for the solar industry. It starts at $490 a year. That's our small business, so it's a small price to pay. But actually, if we could get another 500, 1,000 installers kind of swinging in behind us, that'd be great. Because that when the chips are down, when the proverbial hits the fan, the Smart Energy Council is going to have your back, right? We're going to work tirelessly, right? And it might be whether it's rebate problems in Victoria, whether it's standards problems, whether it's other issues that come up, we've got your back. So think about what is it like, like $35 a month or something. Swing in, you can join online, sign up. If you wanted to do, monthly payments, we can even do that. But love to have a much bigger cohort and then use those professionals as really our brains trust to really advise us and direct our work as well.
Once again, thanks, John. Thanks, Karl.
Thank you very much, John. I've learned a lot today.
And it's great to have people like you listening to us. So please, if you click that follow button or subscribe or even leave a review, it just helps our program get out there and find a few more pairs of ears. So thanks again. Cheers.